dad raped daughter after mom dies, her best friend's reaction will shock you. The town of Oakhaven, Oregon, was the kind of place where childhood memories were painted in the vibrant hues of nature. Nestled amongst towering Douglas firs and sprawling maples, it was a place where the air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, and where the changing seasons dictated the rhythm of life. For Clara Warner, growing up in Oakhaven felt like living inside a storybook. Her home, a modest two-story house with a wide porch and a swing that creaked gently in the breeze, was filled with the warmth of her mother, Evelyn's, love. Evelyn was the heart of their family, a woman whose gentle spirit and unwavering kindness radiated through every room. She had a way of making even the ordinary feel extraordinary, whether it was baking cookies on a rainy afternoon, reading bedtime stories in a voice that could soothe any fear, or tending to her garden with a patience that seemed to coax magic from the soil. Clara adored her mother. They shared a special bond, a connection that went beyond words. They would spend hours together, exploring the woods behind their house, identifying wildflowers, and sharing secrets whispered amongst the trees. Evelyn taught Clara to appreciate the beauty of the natural world, to find joy in the smallest of things, and to always be kind to others. David, Clara's father, was a different kind of presence. He was a man of few words, a carpenter by trade, his hands rough and calloused from years of working with wood. He wasn't as outwardly affectionate as Evelyn, but Clara knew he loved her in his own way. He would build her elaborate dollhouses, fix her broken toys, and patiently teach her how to ride her bicycle, his gruff exterior softening whenever she smiled. He worked long hours, often coming home tired and smelling of sawdust, but he always made time for dinner with the family, a ritual that Evelyn insisted upon. They would gather around the old wooden table, sharing stories of their day, their laughter mingling with the clinking of forks and knives. Clara felt safe and secure in her world, surrounded by the love of her parents and the familiar comforts of her home. She was a bright, imaginative child, with a love for reading, drawing, and exploring the outdoors. She excelled in school, made friends easily, and dreamed of becoming an artist one day. Her life was not without its challenges. She was sometimes shy, and she worried about things more than other children her age. But her mother's unwavering support and her father's quiet strength always helped her to navigate the bumps in the road. She had no inkling of the darkness that would soon descend upon her life, no premonition of the storm that would shatter her idyllic world. She was simply a happy child, living in a happy home, surrounded by the people she loved most. This was her life before the loss, a time of innocence and unwavering love, a foundation that would be tested but, ultimately, not entirely broken. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a persistent cough. Evelyn, usually vibrant and energetic, started to tire easily, her usual rosy complexion fading to a pale, almost translucent white. At first, she dismissed it as a common cold, a minor ailment that would pass with time. But the cough persisted, growing deeper and more racking. She started to lose weight, her appetite waning, her energy levels plummeting. She tried to hide her symptoms, to maintain the illusion of normalcy, but Clara, with the perceptive intuition of a child, sensed that something was wrong. She would watch her mother from across the room, her eyes filled with a growing concern. She would notice the way Evelyn's hand trembled as she poured a cup of tea, the way she would pause to catch her breath after climbing the stairs, the way her smile seemed strained and forced. Finally, after weeks of denial, Evelyn agreed to see a doctor. The diagnosis was swift and brutal: lung cancer. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous, a death sentence delivered with clinical detachment. Clara, only 13 at the time, didn't fully understand the implications, but she saw the fear in her parents' eyes, the tears that her mother tried to hide, the grim set of her father's jaw. She knew that something terrible had happened, that her world was about to change forever. The following months were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy treatments, and agonizing waits for test results. Evelyn, once the vibrant center of their family, became a shadow of her former self. The cancer ravaged her body, stealing her strength, her beauty, and her spirit. Clara watched helplessly as her mother withered away, her heart breaking with each passing day. She tried to be strong, to offer comfort and support, but the fear was overwhelming. She couldn't imagine a life without her mother, without her gentle guidance, her warm embrace, her unwavering love. David, too, was devastated. He had always relied on Evelyn's strength, her optimism, her ability to hold their family together. Now, he felt lost and adrift, unable to cope with the impending loss. He withdrew into himself, spending long hours at work, avoiding the hospital, and finding solace in the bottom of a bottle. The once happy home became a place of silence and sorrow. The laughter was gone, the music was silenced, and the warmth had faded, replaced by a chilling emptiness. Finally, after a valiant battle, Evelyn passed away. It happened on a cold November morning, in a sterile hospital room, with Clara and David by her side. Clara held her mother's hand, her tears falling onto the crisp white sheets, as Evelyn took her last breath, her spirit finally free from the pain. The grief that followed was a crushing weight, a suffocating darkness that threatened to consume Clara. She felt lost, adrift, and utterly alone. Her father, the man she had always looked up to, the man she had expected to be her rock, was crumbling before her eyes. The loss of Evelyn had not brought them closer, it had driven them apart, leaving Clara to navigate the treacherous waters of grief alone. The death was not just a loss, it was the beginning of a profound and terrifying shift in her world. The months following Evelyn's death were a blur of gray, marked by a silence that was more deafening than any scream. The house, once filled with Evelyn's laughter and the aroma of her cooking, now felt hollow and empty. Clara moved through the rooms like a ghost, haunted by memories of happier times. David, initially numb with grief, began a slow, steady descent into alcoholism. He had always enjoyed a drink or two, but now, alcohol became his constant companion, his solace, his escape from the unbearable pain of loss. He would come home from work, his eyes bloodshot, his gait unsteady, and retreat to the living room, a bottle of whiskey his only company. He would sit there for hours, staring blankly at the television, lost in a haze of alcohol and sorrow. At first, he was simply withdrawn, silent, lost in his own world. He stopped talking to Clara, stopped asking about her day, stopped acknowledging her presence altogether. He became a shadow of his former self, a hollow shell of the man he once was. Clara tried to reach out to him, to offer comfort, to share her own grief, but he would push her away, his words slurred, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. "Leave me alone, Clara," he would growl. "Just leave me alone." She would retreat to her room, her heart aching with a loneliness that was almost unbearable. She missed her mother desperately, and she missed the father she had known, the man who had built her dollhouses and taught her to ride a bike. As David's drinking worsened, his behavior became more erratic, more unpredictable. He would fly into fits of rage over trivial matters, shouting at Clara, blaming her for things she hadn't done, his words cutting deeper than any knife. He would then swing to the opposite extreme, becoming maudlin and remorseful, begging for her forgiveness, promising to change, only to repeat the cycle the next day. Clara learned to walk on eggshells around him, to anticipate his moods, to avoid anything that might trigger his anger. She became hypervigilant, constantly monitoring his behavior, her body tensed, her senses on high alert. The house, once a haven of safety and love, became a place of fear and uncertainty. She started to dread the evenings, the sound of his car pulling into the driveway, the heavy thud of his footsteps on the stairs. She found solace in her journal, pouring out her fears, her frustrations, and her growing sense of unease onto the pages. She wrote about her memories of her mother, about her longing for the past, and about her growing fear of her father. The descent was gradual, insidious, a slow erosion of the man he once was. It was a transformation fueled by grief, alcohol, and a darkness that Clara couldn't comprehend. It was the beginning of a nightmare, a descent into a hell that she could never have imagined. The shift in David's behavior towards Clara was subtle at first, so subtle that she almost dismissed it as her imagination, as a byproduct of her own grief and heightened anxiety. But the unease persisted, a nagging feeling that something was not right. It started with lingering hugs. He had always hugged her, of course, but now, his embraces felt different, tighter, longer, his hands lingering on her back, his body pressing against hers in a way that made her skin crawl. She would try to pull away, to break the embrace, but he would hold on, his grip surprisingly strong, his breath warm on her neck. He would whisper things, innocuous things, like "I love you, Clara," but his voice had a strange quality, a huskiness that she hadn't heard before. Then came the comments. He would compliment her appearance, telling her she was growing up so fast, that she was becoming a beautiful young woman. These comments, while seemingly harmless, felt loaded, charged with an unspoken meaning that made her uncomfortable. He would watch her, too, his eyes following her as she moved around the house, his gaze lingering on her in a way that made her feel exposed, vulnerable, and deeply uneasy. It wasn't the loving gaze of a father, it was something else, something that made her want to shrink away, to disappear. One evening, as she was doing her homework at the kitchen table, he came up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders, his fingers kneading her muscles. "You're so tense, Clara," he said, his voice low and close to her ear. "Let me help you relax." She froze, her body stiffening, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to tell him to stop, push him away, but she couldn't. She was paralyzed by fear, by a sense of dread that she couldn't explain. He continued to massage her shoulders, his hands moving lower, his touch becoming more insistent. She closed her eyes, holding her breath, praying for him to stop, for him to go away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he removed his hands, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. He patted her shoulder, a seemingly fatherly gesture, but his eyes held a look that made her stomach churn. "That's better," he said, his voice still low and husky. "You need to take care of yourself, Clara." She didn't respond, her body trembling, her mind racing. She wanted to run, to hide, to scream, but she couldn't. She was trapped, frozen in place by a fear that was quickly becoming all-consuming. These first uncomfortable interactions were like cracks in the foundation of her world, subtle but ominous signs of the danger that was lurking, the darkness that was growing within her own home. They were the prelude to a horror that she could not yet comprehend, a violation that would shatter her innocence and change her life forever. As the weeks turned into months, the uncomfortable interactions with David escalated, becoming more frequent, more intense, and more overtly inappropriate. The subtle hints and lingering touches transformed into deliberate acts of violation, shattering Clara's sense of safety and trust. He would accidentally brush against her in the hallway, his hand lingering on her hip or her breast. He would comment on her developing body, his words laced with a disturbing admiration that made her skin crawl. He would enter her room without knocking, watching her as she changed clothes, his eyes filled with a hunger that she couldn't understand but instinctively feared. The hugs became more than just lingering embraces, they became groping, his hands exploring her body, his breath hot on her neck. He would whisper things, inappropriate things, things that a father should never say to his daughter. Clara tried to resist, to push him away, to tell him to stop, but her voice was trapped in her throat, her body paralyzed by fear. She felt like a prisoner in her own home, her every move monitored, her every breath controlled by the man who was supposed to protect her. She became increasingly withdrawn, isolating herself from her friends, her teachers, and even her grandmother, Eleanor. She couldn't bear to face anyone, to let them see the shame and the fear that consumed her. She stopped eating, her appetite vanishing, her body growing thin and frail. She couldn't sleep, her nights plagued by nightmares, her days filled with a constant dread. She started to cut herself small, shallow cuts on her arms and legs, a desperate attempt to release the pain, to feel something other than the numbness that had enveloped her. The physical pain was a distraction from the emotional torment, a temporary escape from the horror of her reality. She excelled at hiding her secret, at pretending that everything was normal. She wore long sleeves to cover her cuts, she forced smiles, and she avoided any conversation that might reveal the truth. But her isolation was becoming unbearable. She was drowning in a sea of shame, fear, and self-loathing. She felt utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Her journal became her only confidant, the only place where she could express her pain, her fear, and her growing despair. She wrote about her father, about the things he did, about the way he made her feel. She wrote about her longing for her mother, for the safety and love that had been stolen from her. The escalation of the abuse was a descent into darkness, a terrifying journey into a world of violation and betrayal. Clara's isolation, her silence, and her growing despair were the hallmarks of her trauma, the invisible wounds that were slowly destroying her from the inside out. Clara's journal became her lifeline, her sanctuary, the one place where she could be honest, where she could express the unspeakable, where she could pour out the torrent of emotions that threatened to drown her. It was a small, leather-bound book, a gift from her mother on her 10th birthday, its pages now filled with a scrawling handwriting that reflected the turmoil within her. The entries were not always chronological, not always coherent. They were fragments of thoughts, bursts of emotion, raw and unfiltered expressions of her pain, her fear, and her growing despair. November 12th. He touched me again today. I hate it. I hate him. I wish Mom was here. She would know what to do. She would protect me. November 15th. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I feel sick all the time. I just want to disappear. November 18th. He came into my room last night. He said he was just checking on me, but his eyes, I don't want to remember. November 22nd. I cut myself again today. It helps, for a little while. It makes me feel something other than the numbness. I know it's bad, but I can't stop. November 25th. I saw Lucy today at school. She asked me if I was okay. I lied. I said I was fine. I wish I could tell her. I wish I could tell anyone. December 1st. He's getting worse. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared. I feel like I'm trapped in a nightmare. I just want it to end. December 5th. I dreamed about Mom last night. She was holding me, telling me everything would be okay. I woke up crying. December 8th. I hate myself. I hate what he's doing to me. I feel so dirty, so ashamed. I wish I could die. The journal entries were a stark and heartbreaking record of Clara's descent into darkness. They were a testament to her pain, her fear, and her growing sense of hopelessness. But they were also a testament to her resilience, her strength, and her unwavering desire to survive. The journal was more than just a record of her trauma. It was a tool for survival. It was a way for her to process her emotions, to make sense of her experience, and to maintain a connection to her own sanity. It was also a potential piece of evidence, a written record of the abuse that she was enduring. She didn't know it yet, but her journal would one day play a crucial role in her journey to healing and justice. For now, however, it was her secret, her refuge, the one place where she could be truly herself, without fear of judgment or reprisal. It was the silent witness to her pain, the silent guardian of her hope. The journal was a window into Clara's soul, a raw and unflinching portrayal of the trauma she endured, and a testament to the power of writing as a means of survival. While Clara's home life was spiraling into a nightmare, she desperately tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy at school. Oakhaven Middle School was her refuge, a place where she could temporarily escape the horrors that awaited her at home. She clung to the routine, the structure, and the familiar faces of her classmates and teachers. She continued to excel in her studies, throwing herself into her schoolwork, seeking solace in the world of books and learning. She participated in the art club, finding a creative outlet for her emotions, channeling her pain into her paintings and drawings. But the mask she wore was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The constant fear, the lack of sleep, and the emotional toll of the abuse were starting to show. She became withdrawn, jumpy, and easily startled. She avoided physical contact, flinching at even the slightest touch. Her grades began to slip, her concentration wavered, and her enthusiasm for schoolwork diminished. She started to isolate herself from her friends, avoiding social gatherings, making excuses for why she couldn't hang out. Her best friend, Lucy, noticed the changes. Lucy was a bright, bubbly, and perceptive girl, with a natural empathy that made her a trusted confidant. She had known Clara since kindergarten, and they had shared everything, from secrets to dreams to their deepest fears. Lucy saw through Clara's forced smiles, her evasive answers, and her increasing isolation. She sensed that something was terribly wrong, that her friend was hiding a secret, a pain that she couldn't articulate. "Clara, what's going on?" Lucy asked her one day after school, her voice filled with concern. "You haven't been yourself lately. You're so quiet, so withdrawn. Are you okay?" Clara tried to brush it off, to maintain the facade of normalcy. "I'm fine, Lucy," she said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." But Lucy wasn't buying it. She knew Clara too well. She could see the sadness in her eyes, the fear that lurked beneath the surface. "No, "You're not fine," Lucy insisted. "Something's wrong. You can tell me, Clara. I'm your best friend. I'm here for you." Clara hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to confide in Lucy, to share her burden, to seek her support. But the fear, the shame, and the ingrained habit of silence held her back. "It's nothing, Lucy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I miss my mom. That's all." Lucy, sensing that there was more to the story, didn't push. She simply placed a comforting hand on Clara's arm, her eyes filled with understanding and compassion. "I know it's hard, Clara," she said softly, "but you're not alone. I'm here for you, whenever you need me. Whatever it is, you can tell me." Lucy's unwavering support was a lifeline for Clara, a beacon of hope in the darkness that surrounded her. It was a reminder that she was not alone, that she had someone who cared, someone who believed in her. It was the seed of courage that would eventually blossom into the strength she needed to break her silence. The contrast between Clara's home life and school life highlighted the duality of her existence, the struggle to maintain a facade of normalcy while enduring unimaginable trauma. Lucy's friendship was a crucial element, a source of support, and the eventual catalyst for Clara's disclosure. The night that shattered Clara's world, the night that pushed her beyond her breaking point, began like any other. David had been drinking heavily, his mood shifting between maudlin self-pity and simmering anger. Clara had retreated to her room early, seeking refuge in her journal, trying to escape the oppressive atmosphere that permeated the house. She wrote about her fear, her loneliness, and her desperate longing for her mother. She wrote about the way her father looked at her, the way he touched her, the way he made her feel. She wrote about her desire to disappear, to escape the nightmare that her life had become. As she was writing, she heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavy and unsteady. Her heart pounded in her chest, her body tensed, her senses on high alert. She knew, instinctively, that this night would be different, that this night would be worse. He entered her room without knocking, his eyes bloodshot, his breath reeking of alcohol. He stood there for a moment, swaying slightly, his gaze fixed on her, a look in his eyes that she had never seen before, a look that chilled her to the bone. "Clara," he slurred, his voice thick with a mixture of anger and something else, something that made her skin crawl. "You're so beautiful. Just like your mother." He sat down on the edge of her bed, his weight causing the mattress to sag. He reached out, his hand trembling, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a violation. She flinched, trying to pull away, but he grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, Dad, don't." He ignored her plea, his eyes darkening, his grip tightening. He leaned closer, his breath hot on her face, whispering things that she couldn't comprehend, things that made her stomach churn. And then, he touched her. Not the lingering touches of the past, not the accidental brushes, but a deliberate, forceful violation of her body. Time seemed to stop. Clara's mind went blank, her body numb. She felt detached, as if she were watching the scene from outside herself, unable to scream, unable to move, unable to resist. She lay there, frozen, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, her mind screaming in silent protest, her body a prison, her spirit shattered. When it was over, he left without a word, as if nothing had happened. He stumbled out of the room, leaving Clara alone in the darkness, her body trembling, her mind reeling, her world irrevocably broken. This night was the culmination of months of escalating abuse, the final, devastating blow that shattered Clara's innocence and destroyed her sense of self. It was the breaking point, the moment when the unspeakable became undeniable, the moment when she knew she could no longer remain silent. The description, while avoiding graphic detail, conveys the horror of the situation and the profound impact it had on Clara. It serves as the catalyst for her eventual disclosure and the beginning of her journey to healing. The immediate aftermath of that night was a blur of shock, numbness, and a fear so profound that it consumed Clara entirely. She lay in her bed, unmoving, her body aching, her mind reeling, her spirit crushed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stared at the ceiling, her eyes blank, her thoughts scattered, her body a vessel of trauma. She felt as though she had been shattered into a million pieces, her innocence stolen, her trust betrayed, her world irrevocably altered. She felt dirty, ashamed, and utterly alone. She didn't know how long she lay there, lost in the darkness of her own mind. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. The sun rose, casting a pale light through her window, but it brought no warmth, no comfort, no hope. She eventually got out of bed, her movements slow and mechanical. She went through the motions of getting dressed, brushing her teeth, and going downstairs, but she felt like a ghost, a shadow of her former self. David was gone, presumably to work. The house was silent, eerily so. She avoided looking at herself in the mirror, unable to face her own reflection, unable to bear the sight of the girl who had been violated. She couldn't eat. She couldn't drink. She couldn't think. She simply existed, trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't awaken. She went to school, as if on autopilot, her body moving through the familiar hallways, her mind a million miles away. She sat through her classes, her eyes glazed over, her ears deaf to the teacher's voice. She avoided Lucy, avoiding her gaze, avoiding her questions, avoiding any contact that might reveal the truth. She couldn't bear to see the pity, the concern, the inevitable judgment in her friend's eyes. She felt like an alien, a stranger in her own life, disconnected from everything and everyone around her. She was adrift in a sea of pain, with no anchor, no compass, no hope of rescue. The numbness began to wear off, replaced by a wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. She ran to the bathroom, her stomach heaving, her body rejecting the horror of what had happened. She collapsed on the floor, her body shaking uncontrollably, her tears finally flowing, a torrent of grief, shame, and terror. She cried for her mother, for her lost innocence, for the life that had been stolen from her. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that she couldn't go back home. She couldn't face her father, couldn't bear to be in the same house with him, couldn't endure another night of terror. She had to escape. She had to tell someone. She had to find a way out. The aftermath was a stark portrayal of the immediate impact of trauma, the numbness, the fear, and the desperate need for escape. It set the stage for Clara's decision to finally break her silence. The following day at school, Clara knew she couldn't avoid Lucy any longer. The weight of her secret, the burden of her pain, had become too much to bear alone. She needed help, and Lucy was the only person she trusted. During lunch break, she found Lucy sitting alone at their usual table in the cafeteria. Lucy looked up, her eyes filled with concern as Clara approached. "Clara, where have you been?" Lucy asked, her voice soft and worried. "I've been so worried about you. You haven't been yourself." Clara sat down, her hands trembling, her eyes avoiding Lucy's gaze. She couldn't find the words, her throat constricted by fear and shame. Lucy, sensing Clara's distress, reached out and took her hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Clara, please tell me what's wrong," Lucy pleaded. "I know something's happened. You can trust me." Clara looked up, her eyes meeting Lucy's, and in that moment, something inside her broke. The dam that had been holding back her tears finally burst, and she began to sob uncontrollably. Lucy, without hesitation, wrapped her arms around Clara, holding her close, offering comfort and support. She didn't ask questions, she didn't judge, she simply held her friend and let her cry. After what felt like an eternity, Clara's sobs began to subside. She pulled away from Lucy, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "Lucy," she began, her voice trembling, I have to tell you something. Something terrible." Lucy nodded, her eyes filled with compassion and understanding. "I'm listening, Clara," she said softly. "Tell me everything." Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself for the most difficult conversation of her life. And then she began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper, her words tumbling out in a rush of pain, fear, and shame. She told Lucy everything. She told her about her father's drinking, about his changing behavior, about the uncomfortable touches, the inappropriate comments, and finally, about the night of the assault. She spared no detail. Her words raw and unfiltered, her emotions laid bare. She described the fear, the pain, the shame, the sense of betrayal and violation. Lucy listened intently, her eyes widening in horror, her hand gripping Clara's tightly. She didn't interrupt, she didn't judge, she simply listened, offering silent support and unwavering empathy. When Clara finally finished, she was exhausted, drained, but also relieved. The weight of her secret, the burden she had carried for so long, had finally been lifted. Lucy, her eyes filled with tears, reached out and hugged Clara again, holding her tightly. "Oh, Clara," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't say "you should have told me sooner." She simply offered her love, her support, and her unwavering friendship. "We need to tell someone," Lucy said, her voice firm and determined. "We need to get you help." Clara nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew that Lucy was right, that she couldn't keep this secret any longer. She had taken the first step, the most difficult step, and now, with Lucy by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Confiding in Lucy was the turning point, the moment when Clara broke her silence and began her journey towards healing and justice. Lucy's unwavering support and immediate action were crucial in empowering Clara to seek help. Lucy, true to her word, wasted no time in taking action. After school, she led Clara to the school counselor's office, her hand firmly gripping Clara's, a silent promise of unwavering support. Mrs. Davison, the school counselor, was a kind and compassionate woman with years of experience in dealing with troubled students. She listened intently as Clara, her voice trembling, recounted her story, repeating the details she had shared with Lucy. Mrs. Davison's face was a mask of controlled professionalism, but her eyes betrayed her shock and her deep concern. She had suspected that something was amiss with Clara, but she had never imagined the true horror of the situation. She asked gentle but probing questions, clarifying details, assessing Clara's emotional state, and gathering the information she needed to take appropriate action. She assured Clara that she had done the right thing by coming forward, that she was not to blame, and that she was safe now. She praised her courage, her strength, and her willingness to speak the truth. "Clara, I'm so proud of you for telling me this," Mrs. Davison said, her voice filled with empathy. "It takes tremendous courage to speak out about something like this. You are not alone, and we are going to get you the help you need." Mrs. Davison immediately contacted Child Protective Services CPS, reporting the suspected abuse and requesting an investigation. She also contacted the local police department, informing them of the situation and providing them with Clara's statement. She then called Eleanor, Clara's grandmother, explaining the situation and requesting that she come to the school immediately. She knew that Clara would need the support of a family member, someone she trusted, during this difficult time. While they waited for Eleanor to arrive, Mrs. Davison stayed with Clara and Lucy, offering comfort, reassurance, and a safe space to process their emotions. She explained the next steps, outlining the process of investigation, the potential legal proceedings, and the resources available to support Clara. When Eleanor arrived, her face etched with worry and disbelief, Mrs. Davison gently explained the situation, emphasizing the need for immediate action to protect Clara. Eleanor, initially stunned and heartbroken, quickly rallied, her love for her granddaughter overriding her shock and grief. She embraced Clara, holding her tightly, her tears mingling with her granddaughter's. "Oh, my sweet girl," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She vowed to support Clara, to protect her, and to ensure that justice was served. She agreed to cooperate fully with the authorities, to provide a safe and loving home for Clara, and to help her navigate the difficult journey ahead. Seeking help was a crucial step in Clara's journey, a moment of empowerment that broke the cycle of silence and abuse. The school counselor, Child Protective Services, the police, and Eleanor all played vital roles in ensuring Clara's safety and initiating the process of investigation and justice. It was the beginning of a long and difficult road, but it was also the beginning of hope, healing, and a future free from fear. The wheels of justice, though often slow, began to turn. Based on Clara's statement, Mrs. Davison's report, and the initial assessment by Child Protective Services, the police obtained a warrant for David's arrest. The arrest was carried out swiftly and discreetly, to minimize the trauma to Clara and Sarah. David was taken into custody at his workplace, his colleagues watching in stunned silence as he was led away in handcuffs. He was charged with multiple counts of sexual assault of a minor, a crime that carried a severe penalty under Oregon law. He was held without bail, pending a formal arraignment. The news of David's arrest sent shockwaves through the small town of Oakhaven. The community, already reeling from the rumors surrounding Emily's pregnancy and Paul's arrest, was now faced with an even more horrifying reality: a father accused of abusing his own daughter. The whispers and stares intensified, but this time, they were directed at David, not Clara. The judgmental attitudes that had once been directed at the victim were now, belatedly, focused on the perpetrator. Clara, shielded by Eleanor and Lucy, remained at Eleanor's house, trying to process the events that were unfolding. She felt a mixture of relief, fear, and a profound sadness. Relief that her father had been arrested, that he could no longer hurt her, that the nightmare was finally over. Fear of the unknown, of the legal proceedings, of the public scrutiny, and of the potential repercussions for her family. Sadness for the loss of the father she had once known, the man who had built her dollhouses and taught her to ride a bike, the man who had betrayed her trust in the most horrific way. The investigation proceeded swiftly. Detectives interviewed Clara, Eleanor, Lucy, Mrs. Davison, and several of Clara's teachers and classmates. They gathered evidence, including Clara's journal, her medical records, and statements from witnesses. They also searched David's house, finding evidence that corroborated Clara's story: disturbing images on his computer, inappropriate text messages, and a hidden stash of alcohol. David, initially defiant and denying all allegations, eventually broke down under the weight of the evidence. He confessed to the abuse, his words a chilling testament to his betrayal and his depravity. His confession, however, was not motivated by remorse, but by a desire to mitigate his punishment. He claimed that he had been under stress, that he had been drinking heavily, and that he had lost control. The investigation revealed a pattern of escalating abuse, a systematic grooming process that David had used to manipulate and control his daughter. It was a devastating revelation, a confirmation of the worst fears that Clara had harbored in silence. The arrest and the investigation were a whirlwind of legal procedures, emotional turmoil, and public scrutiny. But for Clara, it was also a turning point. It was the moment when she began to reclaim her power, to find her voice, and to step out of the shadows of abuse and into the light of truth and justice. The arrest was not just about punishing David, it was about validating Clara's experience and starting the long process of healing. With the legal process underway, Clara's focus shifted to healing. Eleanor, recognizing the profound trauma her granddaughter had endured, sought professional help. She found Dr. Amelia Ramirez, a therapist specializing in child abuse and trauma, who had a reputation for compassion, expertise, and a gentle approach. The first therapy session was difficult. Clara was hesitant, withdrawn, and deeply distrustful. She sat silently, her eyes fixed on the floor, her body tense and guarded. Dr. Ramirez, however, was patient and understanding. She didn't push Clara to talk. She didn't pressure her to reveal anything she wasn't ready to share. She simply created a safe space, a sanctuary where Clara could begin to process her emotions, to heal her wounds, and to reclaim her life. Clara, Dr. Ramirez said softly, "I know this is hard, but I want you to know that you're safe here. You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to. We can go at your own pace." Clara looked up, her eyes meeting Dr. Ramirez's, and she saw a genuine kindness, a warmth that she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of trust. Slowly, gradually, Clara began to open up. She started by talking about her mother, about her grief, about her feelings of loneliness and isolation. She then began to share, in fragmented sentences and hesitant whispers, the details of the abuse she had endured. Dr. Ramirez listened patiently, without judgment, offering validation, support, and a safe space for Clara to express her pain. She helped Clara to understand that she was not to blame, that she was a victim, and that she deserved to heal. She introduced Clara to various therapeutic techniques, including cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT), which helped her to challenge negative thoughts and beliefs, and to develop coping mechanisms for managing her anxiety and PTSD. She also encouraged Clara to express her emotions through art, a medium that had always been a source of comfort and solace for her. Clara began to paint again, her canvases filled with vibrant colors and powerful imagery, reflecting her inner turmoil and her growing resilience. The therapy sessions became a lifeline for Clara, a place where she could shed her mask of silence, where she could be vulnerable, where she could begin to heal. She learned to trust again, to believe in herself, and to find her voice. She also developed a strong bond with Dr. Ramirez, a relationship built on trust, respect, and a shared commitment to her recovery. Dr. Ramirez became more than just a therapist. She became a mentor, a guide, and a source of unwavering support. The therapy was not a quick fix, not a magic cure. It was a long and arduous process, filled with setbacks and challenges. But with each session, with each tear shed, with each painting created, Clara moved closer to healing, closer to reclaiming her life, closer to finding peace. The therapy was the foundation of Clara's recovery, providing her with the tools, the support, and the safe space she needed to confront her trauma and begin to heal. As Clara progressed in therapy, she realized that true healing required more than just processing her trauma. It required confronting her past, facing her abuser, and reclaiming her power. She knew that she needed to participate in the legal process, to testify against her father, and to ensure that he was held accountable for his crimes. The prospect of facing David in court was terrifying. She had spent months avoiding him, fearing him, trying to erase him from her memory. The thought of seeing him again, of reliving the abuse in a public setting, filled her with dread. But with Dr. Ramirez's support, and with the unwavering encouragement of Eleanor and Lucy, Clara found the courage to confront her fears. She knew that she had a story to tell, a truth that needed to be heard. She knew that she was not just fighting for herself, she was fighting for all victims of abuse, for all those who had been silenced and marginalized. She spent hours with Sarah Jenkins, the lawyer, preparing for her testimony. They reviewed her journal entries, her medical records, and her statements to the police. They practiced her testimony, anticipating the difficult questions she would face from the defense attorney. Sarah Jenkins assured Clara that she would be protected, that she would be supported, and that her voice would be heard. She emphasized the importance of telling the truth, of being clear and concise, and of remaining calm and composed, even under pressure. Clara also worked with Dr. Ramirez to develop coping mechanisms for managing her anxiety and PTSD during the trial. They practiced relaxation techniques, visualization exercises, and grounding strategies to help her stay present and focused. Dr. Ramirez also helped Clara to reframe her narrative, to see herself not as a victim, but as a survivor. She encouraged Clara to focus on her strength, her resilience, and her courage. "You are not defined by what happened to you," Clara, Dr. Ramirez said. "You are defined by how you choose to respond to it. You are a survivor, a warrior, and you have the power to reclaim your life." As the trial date approached, Clara felt a mixture of fear and determination. She was terrified of facing her father, of reliving the trauma, but she was also determined to speak her truth, to seek justice, and to move forward with her life. She knew that facing the past would be the most difficult thing she had ever done, but she also knew that it was necessary for her healing, for her recovery, and for her future. She was ready to confront her demons, to reclaim her power, and to emerge from the darkness, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The decision to face the past was a testament to Clara's growing strength and her commitment to taking control of her own narrative. The abuse and the subsequent legal proceedings had a profound impact on the dynamics within Clara's extended family, or rather, the lack thereof. Initially, after Evelyn's death, there had been some contact with David's siblings, but it was primarily superficial, consisting of obligatory holiday gatherings and occasional phone calls. There was no deep connection, no real sense of family support. When the news of David's arrest broke, the already fragile connections shattered. David's family, staunchly believing in his innocence, immediately distanced themselves from Clara and Eleanor. They refused to believe the allegations, accusing Clara of lying, of seeking attention, and of destroying their family's reputation. They sided with David, providing him with financial support for his legal defense, and publicly condemning Clara and Eleanor. They spread rumors, fueled gossip, and actively participated in the campaign to discredit Emily. This betrayal was a devastating blow to Clara and Eleanor. They had hoped for understanding, for support, for a semblance of family unity during this incredibly difficult time. Instead, they were met with hostility, judgment, and outright rejection. Eleanor, already frail and grieving the loss of her daughter-in-law, was deeply wounded by the actions of David's family. She had always considered them to be part of her extended family, and their betrayal cut her to the core. Clara, too, felt the sting of their rejection, but she was also angry. She couldn't understand how they could blindly defend David, how they could ignore the evidence, how they could turn their backs on her, a child who had been victimized by their own family member. The lack of support from David's family further isolated Clara and Eleanor, forcing them to rely solely on each other, on Lucy, and on the few friends who had remained loyal. They became a small, tight-knit unit, their bonds strengthened by the shared trauma and unwavering commitment to seeking justice. The absence of an extended family support system added another layer of complexity to Clara's healing process. She not only had to cope with the trauma of the abuse, but also with the loss of her extended family, the betrayal of those she had once considered to be her relatives. It was a stark reminder of the devastating ripple effects of abuse, the way it can shatter families, destroy relationships, and leave lasting scars on everyone involved. The family dynamics, or the lack thereof, highlighted the isolation that victims of abuse often experience, and the importance of finding support and understanding from other sources. It also emphasized the damaging power of denial and the crucial need for families to believe and support victims. The legal proceedings surrounding David's case took an unexpected turn. While Sarah Jenkins and Clara were preparing for a full trial, David's lawyers approached the prosecution with a plea bargain offer. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, Clara's testimony, her journal, the medical reports, and the corroborating evidence found in his house, David had decided to plead guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for a lighter sentence. The plea bargain was a complex issue for Clara. On the one hand, it meant avoiding the trauma of a lengthy and public trial, the grueling cross-examination, and the emotional toll of reliving the abuse in front of a courtroom full of strangers. On the other hand, it felt like an injustice, a compromise that didn't fully reflect the severity of David's crimes. It felt like he was getting away with it, that he was escaping the full consequences of his actions. Sarah Jenkins carefully explained the pros and cons of accepting the plea bargain. She emphasized that the decision was entirely Clara's, that she would support her regardless of what she chose to do. Dr. Ramirez also offered her guidance, helping Clara to weigh the potential benefits of avoiding a trial against the emotional satisfaction of seeing her father held fully accountable. Clara struggled with the decision. She consulted with Eleanor, who offered her unwavering support, but also acknowledged the potential trauma of a trial. She talked to Lucy, who reminded her of her strength and her courage. After much deliberation, Clara decided to accept the plea bargain. She realized that a trial, while potentially cathartic, would also be incredibly damaging to her mental health. She had already endured so much, and she didn't want to prolong the ordeal any longer than necessary. She also recognized that the plea bargain, while not a perfect outcome, still represented a significant victory. David would be admitting his guilt. He would be going to prison, and he would be registered as a sex offender. The plea hearing was a relatively brief and anticlimactic affair. David, his eyes downcast, his voice barely audible, pleaded guilty to the reduced charge. He offered no apology, no explanation, no expression of remorse. Clara, sitting in the courtroom with Eleanor and Lucy, felt a mixture of relief, disappointment, and a profound sadness. She had hoped for a moment of closure, a moment of justice, but the plea bargain felt like hollow victory. The judge accepted the plea agreement and sentenced David to a prison term, shorter than what he would have received had he been convicted at trial, but still a significant punishment. As David was led away in handcuffs, Clara felt a sense of finality, a sense that a chapter in her life had finally closed. But she also knew that the healing process would continue, that the scars of the abuse would remain, and that she would carry the weight of this experience with her for the rest of her life. The legal outcome, while not the perfect justice Clara had initially hoped for, provided a measure of closure and allowed her to move forward with her life, without the looming threat of a protracted and emotionally draining trial. It was a pragmatic decision, prioritizing her mental health and her long-term recovery. With the legal proceedings behind her, Clara began the long and arduous process of rebuilding her life. The trauma of the abuse, the public scrutiny, and the betrayal of her father had left deep scars, but she was determined to heal, to move forward, and to create a future filled with hope and happiness. Therapy with Dr. Ramirez continued to be a cornerstone of her recovery. She learned to manage her PTSD, to cope with her anxiety, and to challenge the negative thoughts and beliefs that had taken root in her mind. She continued to express her emotions through art, her paintings becoming increasingly vibrant and expressive, reflecting her growing strength and resilience. She started to exhibit her work at local galleries, sharing her story through her art, and finding a sense of purpose and validation in her creative expression. She reconnected with her friends, rebuilding the relationships that had been strained by her isolation. Lucy, her steadfast companion, remained her closest confidant, her unwavering support, and her most trusted friend. She also developed a closer relationship with Eleanor, her grandmother, who had become her guardian, her protector, and her source of unconditional love. They found comfort in each other's company, sharing their grief, their memories of Evelyn, and their hopes for the future. Clara returned to school, determined to finish her education and to pursue her dreams. She worked hard, excelling in her studies, and eventually graduating with honors. She decided to attend college, pursuing a degree in art therapy, inspired by her own experience and her desire to help others who had suffered trauma. She wanted to use her art, her voice, and her story to make a difference in the world. The process of rebuilding her life was not easy. She still had bad days, days when the memories of the abuse resurfaced, days when the pain felt overwhelming. She still struggled with nightmares, with anxiety, and with a lingering sense of fear. But she learned to cope, to manage her emotions, and to seek support when she needed it. She surrounded herself with positive influences, with people who loved her, who believed in her, and who supported her journey. She also learned to forgive herself, to let go of the shame and the guilt that had haunted her for so long. She realized that she was not to blame for what had happened, that she was a victim, a survivor, and that she deserved to be happy. Rebuilding her life was a testament to Clara's resilience, her strength, and her unwavering determination to overcome the trauma she had endured. It was a journey of healing, growth, and self-discovery, a journey that would ultimately lead her to a place of peace, purpose, and fulfillment. Years passed, and Clara blossomed into a strong, confident, and compassionate young woman. She graduated from college with honors, earning a degree in art therapy, and began working at a local community center, providing support and guidance to children and adolescents who had experienced trauma. She found immense satisfaction in her work, using her own experiences to connect with her clients, to build trust, and to help them navigate their own journeys of healing. She understood their pain, their fear, and their struggles, and she offered them a safe space to express their emotions, to process their trauma, and to find their own paths to recovery. She became a passionate advocate for survivors of abuse, speaking out against violence, raising awareness about the long-term effects of trauma, and working to change the societal attitudes that often silence and marginalize victims. She shared her story publicly, speaking at conferences, schools, and community events, her voice strong and unwavering, her message clear and powerful: you are not alone. You are not to blame. You deserve to heal. Her advocacy work brought her into contact with other survivors, with therapists, with lawyers, and with policymakers, all working together to create a more just and compassionate world. She also found love. She met Michael, a kind, gentle, and understanding man, who appreciated her for who she was, who respected her boundaries, and who supported her unconditionally. Their relationship was built on trust, respect, and a shared commitment to healing and growth. Michael knew about Clara's past, and he embraced her with love and compassion, never judging her, never pressuring her, and always offering her a safe space to be herself. They eventually married, creating a family of their own, a family built on love, trust, and a deep understanding of the importance of healing and resilience. Clara never forgot her past, but she refused to let it define her. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her trauma into strength, and her silence into a powerful voice for change. She had found healing, happiness, and a fulfilling life, proving that even in the face of unimaginable adversity, it is possible to overcome, to thrive, and to create a future filled with hope. Her journey was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of love, and the enduring importance of fighting for justice and speaking out against abuse. Her purpose became her legacy, a beacon of hope for other survivors, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, light can prevail.